So back in 2009, I got super keen to get a VTEC Honda. The CRX on the left hand side, the silver one, was the one that I ended up purchasing it. Granted, the photos shown right now are well before I actually got it. So take note of the front bumper, the spoiler wing, the side skirt, the tyres, the rims, possibly even the headlights actually. And this is what it was like when I got it. So I was running a B16 that had been dodgily spliced in. I don't believe it actually had the air filter on it when I got it. We've got some halo headlights going on the front there. And some shock and wire in here for the remote control doors. Steel pedals, which I definitely hate. Some aftermarket carpet. And a boot mounted battery, running the power directly next to the fuel filler. The colour of it was pretty disgusting, with a hole cut in the dash. Definitely very 90s. And that's how it was when I first got it. It started, it ran, didn't have the front bumper, needed a lot of work. At the time, I was more than willing to put in the work. Also at the time, it was a very expensive CRX. It was right between the point where all CRXs with B16s just completely disappeared. As soon as I bought it, I reckon another 4 or 5 CRXs came up. Probably about the same price in considerably better condition. This one I paid, I think it was $4,500 or $5,000 unregistered, as is. And it was very rough. So this is following the story of this CRX evolution, which there's about 4 parts to it where I changed it up. Some of it small changes, some of it big changes, but this is it when it came back from paint, looking much better. Did have to put an enclosure on the box to get it to pass roadworthy, or the legality side of things. Another issue I did have with it was VTEC wouldn't initially work, and that was some dodgy wiring there. Also retrimmed the dash, instead of it being that disgusting blue, ended up spraying the dash black as well, and tried to fill in the hole that was cut in there. Funnily enough, the piece that was cut out still existed. So this was its final stage for quite some time, which I drove this around on my Australian P plates, which strangely enough I didn't really get defected for it. At one stage I got defected for the exhaust being too low, which it does have a set of B18 headers on it, which did sit ridiculously low. This car was like a go-kart, and it was brilliant. Typical sub in the boot, and I thought I'd chuck in a fire extinguisher, because you never know if you're going to catch on fire, or if you see someone else's car on fire. At least I could get out and lend a hand. And now onwards to part 2. So I tried to go for a bit of a matte finish on the airbox, just to make it a bit less appealing for the police to look at. Changed over the coil pack on there, and also hit a rabbit on the way coming back from Adelaide to home. Took out one side, so I thought I'll even up that front bumper. And what you do when you're in your teenage years, put on a Zerg sticker. Also put a sticker on the back to let the emergency services know that the battery's in the boot. Threw on a dash cover just to hide that shock and hole that was cut out. This particular one was off a Honda Civic of the same year. Did change over the stereo, and running a Momo Racer steering wheel, which came on there when I originally purchased the car. The seats themselves are just some aftermarket set. Weren't that great, but definitely spent a lot of time in them. So most of the interior I went through and sprayed UHT black. And also removed the rear divider in the back of the car to make it a bit more space. The amount of tyres I could throw in here, the amount of rubbish from work that I could throw in here was quite ridiculous. The amount of space that it had was brilliant. Visibility was brilliant. Definitely won't get that in today's cars. You'd look out the back window and you'd barely see a little tunnel out the back, and that's it. Did have the Cyber 2 exhaust on there, the dodgy Cyber rings. I did grow tired of having Cyber on the door, so down the line I did change that up a bit more as well. At this point in time I was doing 1/8 drag racing a town over. It's not bad for a little 1.6 5-speed manual. One of the other dilemmas I did have with it originally getting registered was I saw a lot of debates online about CRXs having engine swaps from D16 to B16. Personally, I had no drama at all getting it registered. The engine was in the car when I got it. It was paid for with it. On the receipt it had the engine number there. I took it into my local Vic Roads, which handle the registration of the vehicle. They had a quick look in the book and they've gone, it had a 1.6 litre engine, 4-cylinder. It still has a 1.6 litre 4-cylinder engine. Tick the box, away I drove. Anyway, it was almost getting due for a change-up. So I'll show you what happens there. After a while, I started to look for another CRX purely for parts. The price of the parts for these had skyrocketed. Around now it probably was about 2014, 2012. I came across this one, it was relatively cheap. Thought, I want to convert to stock, sort of stock bumpers, skirts, brilliant, most things that I require. Stock seats. So I went down to Melbourne and picked it up, which was around a 3 to 4 hour trip. Took it home. One other bonus it had, carbon fibre bonnet, which at the time I thought, convert to stock, see what happens. Another gem I spotted was the 9091 cluster, which I'll definitely be stealing that later on. And an ugly but mostly recoverable dash. So with this I proceeded to rip it apart and part it out. If you look at the heavy sound deadening on the door, that was somewhat extreme. I did use Dynamat on my doors, not to the same level that happened in this car. So with it I proceeded to part it out. I had a couple of Indian guys come down from Melbourne to to purchase the D16. I think they paid $200 and I said to them, you can pull it out yourself for that, which they proceeded to do that. If it was a B16 it would be a different story, but being a D series I wasn't interested in it at all, and that almost recouped some fair bit of the money there. So here they are, both after a wash, which the black one I certainly did not mind. It grew on me over time. As you can see there, I already took the rims off it, which were some ROH rims. And from here I went for a bit of a leather style with the dash. You can see the suede on the door right now, and you can see the leather trim across the dash there. So with each iteration I became more happier with it. So you can see now the fake leather's been trimmed onto the door on the upper half. So I was definitely going for an all black style of colour, which personally everything just needs to be black and I'm happy with it. Around this time I did have shocker damage and replaced the struts with some super lows, which were slightly higher than what was already in there. Around this time as well I installed an innovative traction bar to help with the caster, because I did discover it had a I think it had an impact on the passenger side. So the front cross member was not in good condition. So that being replaced, it definitely stiffened up the front end. Definitely made it nicer to drive. And also stole the strut brace, the rear strut brace, out of the black CRX. Put in the spare tyre in the boot of the car, and made up a little bit of a dodgy cover for it as well. I was toying with the idea of converting it back to stock, so I whacked on the front bumper. Overall, I didn't like it as much as I thought I would have. The other dilemma that I saw was converting the door back to stock. But around this time I was looking at the CRX Australia forums, and there was a guy up in Queensland with the forum name of Honda Pop, which I think would be fairly familiar with other people that had been on that forum. And I was able to purchase a full, I think it was a full Mugen knockoff bumper and side skirts and the lot. So from there on one Sunday arvo, or Saturday, Sunday afternoon, I got extremely keen. Proceeded to prep them, prime them and paint them all in a day. Sadly, it didn't quite match the factory colour of the car, but it was definitely a nice improvement over what was already there. So the use of some tarp, some garbage bags. Also the rear bumper, I did want to go for something slightly different. So the section that normally is under the exhaust that goes from left to right, that typically end up getting a whole bunch of soot on it. So I thought if I could eliminate that completely and cut that out, I'll get a knockoff Mugen rear bumper that's slightly extended down on the sides, and then I won't constantly be cleaning black soot off it. So here's my makeshift painting shed. Overall, it worked. Didn't get too dusty in there. The paint remained relatively clean. The biggest thing I thought was it didn't have the cyber extensions on the side skirts, which I no longer liked. It looked too aggressive. I wanted to go for a bit more of a smoother car. So I think it started raining the next day after I fitted the front bumper, and I was pretty happy with how it turned out. Well, there was the day prior. So the fitment of it was pretty good. The headlights I could never get to sit quite right on the car. They were always kind of saggy, as you can see in the corners of the front bumper, bonnet. And that's how the rear bumper turned out, currently for this time. So I've got the side skirt swapped over, front bumper painted and installed, the rear bumper also installed. This is currently how it lived for quite some time. Quite some time being, I believe it was probably 2 or 3 years before I started to get told to switch it up again. Did try it with the Civic or the CRX D16 carbon bonnet. Did have one slight dilemma. Turns out the bonnet hump was useful, and you can see on the passenger side it's lifted up slightly, or actually more than slightly, probably about half an inch at the headlight. So I was hitting on the valve cover, and it was sitting up higher. So I never really fully trusted the latch that was going on there. Was also able to steal the airbox out of the black CRX. So I proceeded to install that, to again convert it mostly back to stock. Which, if you also see the headers on there, as I said, they were from a B18, or B18 motor, still bolted onto the B16. They hang too low. They were 4-2-1 collectors, and they hung too low below the sump. So I definitely had a lot of issues with that hitting and scraping. But anyway, this was its form for quite some time. I did try to sell it around this time for, I think I wouldn't go lower than $5,000 after the amount that I'd spent on it and the initial purchase of it, which at the time, I think this was about 2015, 2016, was an okay price. There was still currently plenty of CRXs on the market, but most of them were also running a D series, or they were really good condition and they were between probably 7 to 10 grand. Did have a couple of offers of swaps, but nothing that was really worthwhile. So a bit before the birth of my first child, I got a very towy feeling to change this over to being black. So I'd originally started with swapping the Cyber 2 door cards for some just clean ones, no emboss on it. So I proceeded to tear down the CRX, which pretty much only took about a day to do, just because it's such a small car. And I was planning on going gloss black with a slight green tint to the clear. In the end, that idea failed, but I did sample it, didn't quite work out, so I proceeded just to go all black. The bonnet itself and the roof, I did end up using paint stripper on it, because it definitely had some horrible crow's feet going through the paint, and it was always something that annoyed me about it. Another thing I did manage to get off the black CRX was a stock exhaust manifold, which was able to bolt up perfectly to the B series motor and to the factory exhaust. So that definitely gave it so much more clearance. Didn't really change the sound of it too much. And around that time I did also change the exhaust from being the Cyber twin-tipped exhaust to, I wanted just a gloss black single tip coming out this back. The place that I purchased it from decided to give me a matte black one, which I wasn't overly happy with, but I went with anyway. The painting stage in the end did get a bit rushed, just because my wife was very close to having our firstborn. So I got to the stage of, if I don't do it now, this is never going to get done. So in the end, managed to prime everything relatively easily. Did clear up the roof, which was, quite horrible. The smell of paint stripper is definitely not pleasant. Comes out as a thick goo, and you just spread it along, leave it, and it just starts bubbling everything. Was happy with the priming and the primer filler. Definitely managed to smooth out a few different sections of the car that did have issues. Granted, it wasn't a full respray, but it also wasn't a closed door respray. So I did attempt the door jams, went through and done the vast majority of it. But overall, this stage did slow down quite a bit. The paint itself didn't really come out too glossy, which was a bit disappointing. Not sure if it was the weather, the gun, my technique, but overall it did get painted. Overall I was quite happy with the finish considering. It definitely could have turned out a lot worse, but it was definitely a lot better than the silver that was originally there. So at this point in time, it was probably around 2018, 2018. It was rarely getting driven. Once every probably 3 months I'd take it for a drive, purely with one small kid and another kid on the way. So as with all project cars that are coupes, they slowly have to get sold. That's pretty much where this one ended up going. So this ended up getting advertised on Gumtree, Facebook Marketplace, the usual spots. And I did inside the door jams as well, but wasn't overly happy with the finish on that. But pretty much no time to fix or correct it. But a CRX in black is definitely my preferred style of car. I didn't end up doing the engine bay, but it did overall turn out quite well. So with it as well, painted the traction bar, repainted the valve cover. This is how it was mostly turning out in the end here. The interior I was able to swap over to the 91 cluster. That was very straightforward to do. Definitely worthwhile doing. Especially because the overall quality of it, I reckon, fits the CRX a lot more. It's when I think of CRXs, I think of the 91 cluster, not the 88 cluster. Also, this model being the 88 model, it does have the same lower control arms as a Type R, which is the box style lower control arms rather than the eyelet ones, which is an advantage in one way. Slightly limits what suspension you can get, but it does mean you can get second-hand Type R suspension, put it into here with minimal dramas. So this was pretty much its final form. I was able to put the rear carpet back in, put the divider back in, and overall the finish of it, the paint itself I'd probably give a 6 out of 10. Definitely not what you'd a paid for job, probably better than most backyard jobs. Here we are prior to reinstalling the side skirts, which since I got rid of the original ones that were on there, I did have to make the other ones match up a lot better, which that was quite a task. One other thing I did notice, if you can see it in the top left hand corner of the bonnet, just near the guard, you can see it with a slight gap. That's right where the little arm is that holds the bonnet up. So just over time, I'd say it spent too much time up there, and it's actually the weight of the bonnet has caused it to bend. So this is pretty close to nearly the last stage it was before I sold it. And here we go. We got the side skirts back on, the door pods back on, and this is pretty much where it was when the car prior to it being sold. From that all the way to this. So the CRX, yeah, I definitely would like another one down the line, or even potentially another B16 vehicle, or a VTEC B series. At the moment, the daily drive's a 2008 WRX, which, even though it's more powerful than this, I reckon I have more fun in the B16 motor, purely for VTEC. It's dumb, simple. Well, it's not dumb. It was smart at the time. But purely that noise change, hit $5,000, straight to redline, or rev it out to redline every first, second, third, fourth. Brilliant little car. Definitely see why these are a tuner car. Since selling it, I've seen bugger all of these available for sale. It's either been a completely trash one, where someone's wanting a couple of grand for it, that doesn't run, had a smash, crap interior, or it's a complete opposite, where they're wanting 10 grand plus for a B16 CRX that's kept in pretty tidy condition. So at the minute, when I sold this one, there was very little other cars available at the time. But overall, the CRX B16,